To move on to the other side of the Atlantic now, right. Kate, you've got, is it the New York Times there on the tablet?
It is the New York Times here, which is talking about Michael Flynn, the National Security Advisor, who earlier this year was fired because it turned out that he had more communications with the Russians than he had let the Vice President to believe. Flynn is now cooperating with the FBI and Agent Mueller, who is running the special investigation into Russia. And the New York Times...
He's cut some kind of deal, hasn't he?
Well, most likely. It looks like his cooperation might get him off on some of his other areas in which he might be more guilty. What the New York Times is highlighting is that Flynn might have had more communications with the Trump transition team than Donald Trump himself wanted to let on. It's an important story. Russia is going to continue to be an important story, but this is still not the smoking gun that I think most of Trump's opposition wants to find. And it concerns me that every story like this is used to prove that there was collusion. We still have no evidence that there was collusion. Who knows what will happen? We might find it.
So stay calm on this story. Follow the details. Stay calm.
And if you are actually frustrated with Donald Trump, going after him on Russia, I think, is the wrong angle. Go after his policy proposals. Look for other candidates that might be able to challenge him on the left and the right.
Well, let's do that then, because he's coming to this country, we read this morning, in February.
Yeah, I mean, apparently he's going to be here in February. There is, down in Battersea on the South Bank, a huge new American embassy that's being built. It's nearing completion. So the story is that he comes to London in February to open that and perhaps go to 10 Downing Street. Not a full state visit, but a working visit. And
Can I ask you something about this? Because we've had these, I would say, actually disgraceful tweets from him this week, retweeting Britain First, which is a fascist, racist organisation. He retweeted Free Britain.
OK, let's just get this right, shall we? There are 43.6 million people that follow Donald Trump. Donald Trump follows 45 people. One of those is Ann Coulter, right-wing American commentator. Yeah. She retweeted these videos. He picked it up from her and retweeted it. He wouldn't have an earthly clue who Britain First were.
That doesn't matter.
Were they in good taste?
Stupid.
Well, he's not that stupid. He's president of the USA,
well, if he doesn't
and he's
know what
dominating.
He's retweeting.
Of course he doesn't. Of course he doesn't research
that means
everything.
He is stupid.
All right, no. You're dealing with a very different president here.
I'm asking a slightly different question, if I may. Was that not a disgraceful thing to do? Those tweets, were they not themselves disgraceful? They're stirring up hatred between people in this country. They're fake news. They should not have been retweeted by the President of the United States.
Was the story about ISIS throwing people off buildings fake news? No, it wasn't. It was true.
It happened in Egypt.
Do I think, Andrew, those tweets were in good taste? Not particularly. No, I don't. But the point is
You're going to defend him.
The level of outrage from the liberal elite in this country is out of all proportion.
Can I just say,
with what?
You can't actually.
With what happened here.
I can.
And every single time, No, I haven't finished yet. I haven't finished yet. And the idea that should lead to half the Labour Party saying he shouldn't be allowed to come to our country, frankly, is ridiculous. And I think is viewed by the public as being ridiculous.
Aisha, Donald Trump is a racist, he's misogynistic, and he's Islamophobic. He peddles in stirring up hate and division. Now, that is something that you might agree with, but that is not what British values are in this country. And just remember...
You're out of touch.
As Jo Cox lay there dying,
you're out of touch.
The scumbag who executed her shouted out the words, Britain First. So the idea
that
you defend Donald Trump
as... Do you actually think the President knows who Britain First are?
If he doesn't know
he does by now, I would have thought.
He is not fit to hold that office.
I agree with Aisha completely in sentiment. I'm ashamed that the President goes about living his life in this manner. And we've seen it for a long time. He was attacking Mexicans as rapists and murderers before he was even elected. So this is nothing new, and it's deeply frustrating. We have to live in reality, and politicians can't sever ties with Donald Trump. I think a working visit is in order. I also don't think that people should be banned from coming to the UK because of unsavory views that they hold, as unsavory as they may be. But I think we, the public, have every right to protest this.
I slightly disagree.
That is the right thing to do.
You said that Aisha was out of touch. When you see what happened in Charlottesville, for instance, and all those people making fascist salutes, and you hear some of the things being said from the Trump administration and that Steve Bannon thing, do you not think perhaps you are getting too close to a dark kind of politics?
Do you know something? I think I believe I've done more than anybody in this country to stop the rise of the far right in Britain. I did it by taking away those people who were going out and voting BNP and holding their nose. So when it comes to dealing with the far right, I've got a very good track record. Of course, I would condemn. Of course, I would condemn the extremists in Charlottesville, but the extremists on both sides, and it's very important that we don't get stuck.
Nigel,
look,
you've done more to stir up.
There are people out
there.
There are people out there on the left in this country who use violence to pursue their means. There's bad on both sides. It's important to recognise that. Very important.
I don't think we're going to get a calm consensus on this, I suspect. We're therefore going to go to a completely different story.
Nigel Farage is the former head of the UK Independence Party and has long been sounding the alarm on Islamic extremism in Europe. He joins us tonight. At what point, Nigel, do you think that your leaders, European leaders, start to realize maybe these attacks are connected in some sense?
Oh, no, there's no realisation at all. In fact, what happens is they all stand up and they say, we stand in solidarity with Barcelona or Brussels or Stockholm or Paris or London or wherever it may be, and this is really, truly awful, and we have no understanding of why this is going on. And not once do we ever hear a single leader in Europe offer any policy solution whatsoever. They are still in denial, and I can only guess it's because they're so embarrassed by the fact that they have caused this.
Angela Merkel is regarded as a hero by liberals in the United States. Still, is there any political price to be paid by any of these European leaders for these policies which are demonstrably failing and making the continent worse?
Well, I think there will be, and I think, to be honest with you, if we go back a year, I think Brexit was about much of this, wasn't it? It was the British people saying, look, you know, we actually want to control our borders, not because we dislike anybody, but because we believe, firstly, in sensible border controls, and secondly, in protecting ourselves and making ourselves a bit safer. So you could say the EU has paid a big political price in terms of Brexit. But for the moment, one of the problems is that many of the parties around Europe that stand up against Islamic extremism themselves appear to the electorate at times to be a bit extreme themselves.
Right. Well, that is true. Is it my imagination, or are we not seeing attacks like this in Central and Eastern Europe?
Well, you're not, and of course it's very interesting, isn't it, that, I mean, Viktor Orban, who is the Prime Minister of Hungary, along with the other Prime Ministers in Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, they've been told by Merkel and the gangsters in Brussels that they must accept the migrant quotas of those that are coming in across the Mediterranean, and they've simply said no, we're not going to do it. And if we're being really frank about this, Tucker, there is a direct link and relationship between the number of people you let in from different religions and different cultures and the number of terror attacks. And that's why in Eastern Europe you're simply not seeing it.
Interesting. Do you think they can hold out against the demands from Brussels to change their immigration policy?
They're being threatened with going to the European Court. They're being threatened with being fined. They're being threatened with European funds being withheld. Do you know something? These countries have lived under communism. They've lived under Nazism. They've lived under all these things within living memory, within a human lifespan. And I do not think they are going to buckle for one moment. And when you see scenes like that boat coming onto the beach in Cadiz the other day, I think they're pretty determined to stand their ground.
Why would, and I'm sure that you could write a book on this because there's a lot of psychodrama in it, but crisply, why in the world would European leaders want Hungary to follow the example of Germany's immigration policy?
Well, because the point about the European Union is that it wants to take away the power of all the individual member states and make them abide by one rule. And that's the path they've headed down with the euro and everything else. They wanted to create a United States of Europe, but the problem is this is not America. It's a continent of very diverse peoples, and you can see with Brexit, with rebellions that we've seen in Greece against the Eurozone, and now with the Central and Eastern European states saying they will not take Islamic terrorism and even Islamic immigration on a huge scale. I think the whole European project is falling apart. But I tell you what interests me, apart from what's happening in Europe, is, OK, we can say the European politicians are in denial, but it's what's happening in America that amazes me. Seems to me there's a large section of America that is much more concerned with tearing down historical statues that date back to the Civil War than recognising who the real enemy of the West is.
Of course, of course. There's never been a country with a dumber class of leaders than ours, unfortunately. Nigel Farage, thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're calling time on Britain's membership of the European Union.